Hello, friend. Thanks for joining me for another book chat. Today, let's spend a few minutes with Call Me by Your Name by André Aciman. This work of fiction was originally published in 2007, and it's the second book by André Aciman that I've read and chatted here on my channel. I previously chatted a collection of essays by Aciman called Homo Idealis, and I will link to that chat down below if anybody's interested in checking that out. So, yeah, this book was adapted into a movie, and I saw the movie several years ago, well before I read the book. I, for some reason, didn't think about reading the book. I really did like the movie. It had Timothy Chalamet in it, and Armie Hammer were the leads in that. And I listened to an audio edition of this book that was actually read by Armie Hammer, and I did enjoy that. So, spoilers, this is kind of a coming of age tale about a young man, Elio, the character played by Timothy Chalamet in the movie. Now, as far as this chat is going to be about the book and movie are pretty similar, but I will be focusing on the book. And spoilers, it is a coming of age tale. It is a first love kind of tale. And although it's not a spoiler driven book per se. It is really more about the inner sort of psychology of desire and first love and things like that. But nevertheless, I won't just give away anything that I think would really detract from a first time reader's experience with the book. Anyway, okay, so the main characters are Elio, young man named Elio. He's 17 years old, I believe, in the novel. And then he lives in Italy with his parents. His father is a professor. They are Americans, but they live in Italy. And his father, in the summers, gets a grad student, like a PhD student, that helps him with his research and stuff over the summer. And so it's sort of a family tradition about picking who the next person's going to be and stuff. And then that person comes and spends the summer with them. And this particular summer, the summer that Elio is 17, the young graduate student that comes there, his name is Oliver. I believe he's 23 or 24 ish. He's a few years older, obviously, than Elio. And he begins to work with Elio's dad there, and the settings in the book, mentioned it's Italy. It's also the 1980s, so we have that sort of 80s vibe. But the atmosphere that's written in the book, just the landscape and whatnot, is really makes for a great setting for this kind of book, I think. So Elio is attracted to Oliver basically right away. In a way, kind of a I don't know. It was kind of I think he found Oliver kind of annoying and arrogant. He thought at first, but over time he actually does become quite attracted to him. And so the book is really about but the way the book's written. This is one way that is kind of different than the movie because the movie can't really do this. The book is mostly or largely Elio's inner dialogue about his feelings about this situation. There's a quote here that sort of illustrates Elio's inner dialogue in the sense of he trying to, so he doesn't try to seduce Oliver because he doesn't have that skill set, but he nevertheless tries to let him know that sort of how he's feeling. He says, the quote says, if he only knew that I was giving him every chance to put two and two together and come up with a number bigger than infinity. He's trying to give Oliver signals. Eventually, I don't think it's really a spoiler to let you know that Oliver and Elio do sort of create a bond and begin eventually a relationship. But, the thing is, Oliver is in a different, even though he's only 23 or 24, I believe he's 24. He's a few years older. He's kind of in a different life set. So Elio is really at that door of adulthood, and Elliot has already kind of walked through that door. So he's already kind of on this trajectory, a different trajectory. So there's this idea of traviamento, which is an Italian word I had to look up. I got a quote here about it. It's for apparently it sort of means taking a detour or taking a wrong turn or a different turn in life. And this quote comes from a conversation that Elio's father is having with Oliver. And he says, everyone goes through a period of traviamento. When we take, say, a different turn in life, the other via, Dante himself did. Some recover, some pretend to recover, some never come back, some chicken out before even starting, and some, for fear of taking any turns, find themselves leading the wrong life all along. That taking a detour or taking a different path than the one that you are on originally is something that I think Oliver's really grasping with through this situation because his life is different. He's not staying in Italy, for example. And so, yeah, I think that sort of that idea of the road taken. And then this also becomes a lesson for Elio as far as the sort of the sadness or the regret eventually, because remember, this is a summer romance. It's not destined to go beyond that. And so that sort of idea of regret, like, should I've even done it? Like, even bothered? And that's something that the book talks about. So, speaking on regret, Elio's father says to Elio later, there's this monologue. So, a lot of things happen in the book, and it's all very beautifully written, but at the end of it all, there's some regret. And not Oliver, Elio and his father have this really meaningful conversation. And then there's this in the movie, it's a monologue of the father. In the book, there is a section where the father is giving advice to Elio. And, if everybody had a father like Elio's, I think the world would be a really different place. But Elio's father is telling Elio, we rip out so much of ourselves to be cured of things faster than we should, that we go bankrupt by the age of 30 and have less to offer each time we start with someone new. But to feel nothing so as not to feel anything, what a waste. So he's telling Elio, don't don't rip out the part of yourself that feels regret, that feels sadness, or that feels loss. That part is important. If you tear that part of yourself out that feels that, then your next time that you're involved with somebody, you won't have as much then to give. Because remember, Elio is 17. It's his first really adult relationship in this sense. And so, yeah, I thought that was really cool. And then there's another kind of quote about that I think this was Oliver and Elio, and I think this might have been Oliver that said this, but I'm not sure. But the quote says, "And on that evening, when we grow older still, we'll speak about these two young men as though they were two strangers we met on the train, and whom we admire and want to help along. And we'll want to call it envy, because to call it regret would break our hearts." Yeah, so actually, I believe this is also in the monologue of the dad. I just wrote the note. It was hard to tell, but I think so. But to call it regret would break our hearts. So it's not regret, even though you envy them because of what they had. All of life is really about loss, and that's another sort of theme I think through the book is that everything is transient. Yeah. So let's see. As far as the Call Me By Your Name, the title of the book. I did want to mention that because I thought that was so kind of cool. So that summer, Elio sort of gets hurt initially, or gets feels rebuffed by Oliver, and he begins a relationship with a local girl, and the relationship with the local girl is quite different than it described quite differently in the book than with Oliver. But there's I think this is I wrote down the first time that they talk about "Call Me by Your Name," and I wrote the quote says, "Which was when I okay." Which was when must have begun using obscenities that he repeated after me, softly at first, till he said, call me by your name and I'll call you by mine, which I'd never done in my life before, and which, as soon as I said my own name as though it were his, took me to a realm I never shared with anyone in my life before or since. So the sense that I got from that, the reason I brought up the relationship with Marisa, the girl, is because that relationship with the girl felt like a completion, right? A completion of opposites. And so, you have this one piece that's incomplete, and then another piece that completes it. And then this "Call Me by Your Name" segment here was like the relationship with Oliver, since it's a same-sex relationship, it was more like a mirror. And so to call Oliver Elio, and Elio called um, Oliver Elio, to call each other by their names, was that sort of illustration of that kind of mirror. And that's kind of what I took away from that. That's not the only instance where that's brought up. There's another quote there that says about remembrance, and Elio's wondering if Oliver really does remember. Oliver says, "I'm like you," he said. "I remember everything, everything about that summer." Elio says, "I stopped for a second. If you remember everything I wanted to say, and if you are really like me, then before you leave tomorrow, or when you're just ready to shut the door of the taxi and have already said goodbye to everyone else, and there's not a thing left to say in this life, then just this once, turn to me, even in jest, or as an afterthought, which would have meant everything to me when we were together, and as you did back then, look me in the face, hold my gaze, and call me by your name." That mirror is a form of completeness. It's the form of completeness in this sense, I think. That's kind of what I took away from it. Okay, I'm almost out of time. There is a couple of more things I wanted to bring up about the book. That is ghost spots. He talks about these ghost spots where meaningful things happen in your life, and then you return sometimes years later, and you can just remember that you have that memory right there. And these are called ghost spots in the book, where a former version of yourself or a former version of someone you knew or loved exists. And then this book's been wound up, I read, being banned in a few places in schools, particularly, I guess, because of the same sex aspect and Elio being 17. But there is this peach incident that is, I did want to mention, it's in the movie, but it's in the book. It's a little bit different. And I think that's probably why, because the book is not really that explicit otherwise, except for this peach scene. And if you've seen the movie or read the book, you know what I'm talking about. So that's really the only kind of, I would say, more or less explicit connotation. But anyway, enough there, I guess. I really enjoyed reading this book. I've actually read the sequel to this book, which is called Find Me, and I've already finished that. And I will have a chat on it coming up before too long. I hope I'm behind on my chats, but at some point I will get a chat done on the sequel. So until next time, take care.